Hello, class. Welcome to the lecture. Today's lecture on the Constitutional Convention, Philadelphia in 1787. This is a follow-up to the activity that we did in class about the Constitution and the structure of American government. So let's get started with a little warm-up here. Think of a time when you had to reach a compromise with someone, a friend, a parent, etc. And think about what was the topic you disagreed on, why did you disagree on the topic, how did you reach the compromise, and did you get everything you needed in that situation? So take a moment here, just write down an answer to those three questions, pause the video, think about those things, write it down, and we'll talk about this in class tomorrow when we meet again. So our focus for this particular video is why is the Constitution a document of compromises? All right, that's essential question from the text, from the class, and hopefully by the end of this lecture we'll be able to understand why the document's a document of compromises, some of the features within it, and particularly federalism. This lecture may be in two parts. I'll try to get it done in 15 minutes, but may not be able to, so I'll let you know at the end of the video if you have to go on to a part two. Both of them will be on YouTube with links on the Fusion page. Okay, so let's get started. So we have to remember James Madison. James Madison said that the national government must rule by law, not by suggestion. And James Madison shared this thought going into the Constitutional Convention because he looked at the Articles of Confederation and argued that the system was too weak to really allow the states to create an orderly society. There were trade issues created by the lack of power that a national Congress had. And many of the delegates from the states recognized that there needed to be some sort of uniform economic rules for the states. Many delegates still weren't sure how much power they wanted to give up to the national government, but many of the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787 recognized there should be things like a common currency and common trade rules, because that's the one area where the states really were the most united, was in economic and certainly defense areas. But James Madison was one of the, I guess you could say, leaders of the Constitutional Convention. Some historians call him the father of the Constitution. I don't know if we want to give him that much credit, but he certainly had a very aggressive agenda going into the Philadelphia Convention. Overall, he felt the national government needed more power to govern, and the Articles of Confederation in his mind was a good first attempt, but it wasn't just wasn't effective enough. And this quote here kind of shows you his point of view, that the Articles of Confederation allowed Congress to rule by suggestion, that Congress could suggest states gave them money, could suggest laws to the states. He argued that the national government needs to be able to rule by laws that are enforceable and binding in all the states. And that would create a much stronger system and a much more steady system, and allow for, as I pointed out before, order instead of chaos, because that is the purpose of any government structure. So there are four key issues at the Constitutional Convention that the states had to discuss and had to iron out. What will this new structure look like? And most of the conversation centered around these four issues: the structure of the national government, representation in the national government, so how would the states be represented, and powers of the national government. What are we going to allow a national government to do versus what are we going to retain for the states? And then, of course, slavery. So these are the four issues. The first two were the most important because they're talking about, what are the powers of the government and structure. But this was the first debate among many on these particular topics, and particularly on the powers of the national government. So as we go forward here in thinking about this, we have to remember our Montesquieu. So under the Articles of Confederation, many of the powers of government were united in a single body. The question was, should the new nation continue at all? And what path should it continue in terms of the power of the national government? There were questions that were brought up. How do we protect the people from the states? How do we protect the people from overbearing state governments? How do we protect the national government from the states? How do we protect the national government from being overruled by the states or overpowered by the states? And vice versa, how do we protect the states from being overruled by an all-powerful national government? And finally, how do we protect the people's rights? These are all questions that were, burning questions, important questions at the Philadelphia Convention. So I think if we go to our Montesquieu, we might see the philosophy that James Madison, anyway, and some delegates of the Constitution came from. So when the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty, lest the same monarch or senate should enact tyrannical laws to execute them in a tyrannical manner. Montesquieu brings it up, saying that when we put too many powers in the same body, in the same person, or in the same small group, there is no liberty. So how do we overcome that? And Montesquieu would suggest that there should be multiple branches of the government with multiple powers given to each one, so that one person executes laws, one person or group makes laws, and another interprets them and rules on their value or their legality. And so the Baron de Montesquieu in 1745, again, another enlightened thinker, kind of came after John Locke, argued this in England, and this should be the structure of England. And that idea was sort of prominent already in the colonies. Many of them already had colonial or state legislatures with governors. But the point here is that how do we take all these issues into account and make sure that government is not overbearing on the people, and at the same token that people respect and listen to the government. So at the Philadelphia Convention, there were two suggestions about what the structure of the national government should look like, taking all these big questions into account. Okay, and there's a suggestion from the delegates from Virginia, and also a structure presented by the delegates from New Jersey. Okay, now the Virginia Plan made significant changes to the Articles of Confederation. It was really drawn up by James Madison, but it was introduced at the convention by Edmund Randolph, one of the delegates from Virginia. Randolph was actually a more well-respected person at the time than James Madison. And Madison went to Randolph and said, I want you to present this because I think the delegation as a whole will respect it if it comes from you rather than me. So Randolph presents this idea amongst in the first weeks of the convention as a potential plan for the structure of the government. So the Virginia Plan would create a two-house, or as we call it, bicameral legislature. So there would be two parts to the legislature, both of which would have to pass a law. There would be an executive elected by the legislature and a separate court system. Now in the Virginia Plan, the two-house legislature would be based, the representation in that legislature would be a little bit different than in the Virginia Plan, or excuse me, in the New Jersey Plan. I'll get to that in a second. Okay, the New Jersey Plan really retained much of the Articles of Confederation. The big difference was it provided for a Council of Presidents elected by the legislature. So in the New Jersey Plan, it retained a single house like it was under the Articles of Confederation, a Council of Presidents, so more than one person, largely because they feared a situation like the King and King of England, and then a separate court system established by the legislature. Okay, so both of these systems put a lot of emphasis on the legislature as the governing body and not as much emphasis on the executive, which is an interesting sort of thought process, a little bit different than Americans think now. Now we kind of look at our president as the leader of the national government, but the original structures that were proposed by the New Jersey delegation and the Virginia delegation are a little bit different in their emphasis. On the topic of representation in government, it said the Virginia Plan was a little bit different than the New Jersey Plan. Virginia was a large state. It had one of the largest populations in the United States, excuse me, at that point. Virginia was 1, Pennsylvania was 2. So Virginia wanted proportional representation, or based on the number of people in the state. So the more people in your state, the more votes you would get, or the more representatives you would get in the national government. The New Jersey plan wanted to retain the one state, one vote, which was the same as the Articles of Confederation. Now, New Jersey was a smaller populated state, right? So we have a plan from a state with a lot of people in it versus a plan from a state with not so many people in it. And then, of course, there are states that follow the same pattern as these two states. So, of course, from the large states, or the states with a lot of population, New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, they kind of supported the Virginia plan. Say, hey, this makes sense. We have more people. We should get more votes in the national government if we're going to have laws that affect us. Versus the New Jersey plan got support from some of the smaller states, Rhode Island, Delaware, Connecticut, saying, well, you know, we want to all be equal in this national government and not have the large states dominate the national government. Okay? So there's problems with each kind of representation. There's potential problems in each of this case, right? Going back to that slide. So, you know, there's the potential for the large states to dominate the small states, but with the small states, we saw the problem underneath the Articles of Confederation. Gridlock. When everyone has one vote, it's easy for laws to get bogged down and difficult to make those laws. So the solution to this problem comes from Roger Sherman from Connecticut, and historians called this the solution the Great Compromise. Some historians, including myself, would argue it really wasn't that great, but it did solve the number one problem of the convention, which was, you know, what to do about the structure of the government. So Roger Sherman kind of combines the Virginia and New Jersey plans to create our current structure. So the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut plan, creates a two-house legislature. The House of Representatives would have proportional representation elected directly by the people. So these local representatives would be elected by their district and would be responsive directly to the people. And the more people that lived in your state, the more districts or the more representatives your state got. So Virginia might get 20 representatives, where Delaware might get 2. Then it also created the Senate, which would be equally represented among the states. 2 representatives for each state, and these would be elected by the state legislature. So in the Connecticut plan, or through the Great Compromise, Roger Sherman tries to both represent the needs of the people through the House of Representatives, and the Senate would represent the needs of the state, literally of the state, because they would be elected by the state government, not directly by the people. So kind of balancing both those interests within the legislature. The Great Compromise proposed a single executive chosen by an electoral college, not directly by the people. The electoral college is a complicated system with a lot of steps to go through, but basically the president is not elected by popular vote. Each state gets a number of votes for president. So you would take the number of their representatives, so let's say it was 20 for Virginia, plus the number of their senators, which would be 2. So Virginia would get 22 votes in the presidential election. Whoever won the election in Virginia, so let's say it was George Washington versus John Adams. If George Washington won Virginia by 1 popular vote, Virginia's electors in the Electoral College, all 22 of them, would vote for George Washington. So when you're running for president, you're not trying to just get the most votes from all the people in the United States. You're trying to win each state and each state's election, because each state will vote for the president in the Electoral College. Okay? It's an interesting system that kind of safeguards some things that the writers were concerned about. They were worried about an electorate of the people who might take issues and their opinions sway back and forth very sharply on things. And it was supposed to create a system that was a little more balanced and hopefully get a leader that was the best representative or the best executive for the country at the time. Okay, and then of course it created one Supreme Court, but it gave the House of Representatives and the Senate the opportunity to create more courts underneath it. Okay, so 3 branches of government, each with different jobs. All right, so we're coming up on 15 minutes here, so I might have to I'm gonna have to pause. I'm gonna have to go to part 2 of this. So we'll take a look at part 2 and some of these other issues. Check it out, part 2 on YouTube. Thanks.